production export development in Ukraine to show what, in addition, come in terms of problems, what volumes are missing, volumes that had been expected until February this year. Now, looking at it from hindsight, in retrospect, it didn't come as badly as we had thought in May or June it would. Exports did flow in a better way because of the grain corridor on the Black Sea. The Ukrainians and the Russians produced well. They had favorable climate conditions and produced more than expected. The problem is that exports don't flow as fast as they would. They should, and we would need them. And that's why world market prices are so high. This is to say, anyhow, we have lots of people in hunger. Then we have a growing world population by 2050, maybe another 25%, up to 9.7 billion. And then, hopefully, globally seen, we have growth in income, which means that people will have a higher demand for food. The WHO says we need up to 50 or 60% more by 2050 in terms of agricultural production, and this is quite a lot, right? As I said, often the claim is that it's a distribution problem only. Well, mathematically, it is a distribution problem. Look, if we reduce our meat consumption drastically, if food waste gets reduced, probably without additional production, we could make do. The problem is world food is not a mathematical thing. It's not arithmetics. Where do we get there? This is an example, a graph. The Bonn people had FAO data to include that. Is development path for various countries. The axis shows per capita the meat consumption, and down below the per capita income in those countries. And the arrow shows the development for a particular country, where it was early 1990 and where it ended up in terms of income and in terms of meat consumption, both. So we see there is a broad margin, and this is not academically estimate. There are also other studies that support this idea. It seems to show that the meat consumption peak had its peak at about $35,000, $40,000 income a year. And then it flattens, and in many of the industrialized countries goes down, from meat consumption, mind you. But the point is, you can see where the world stands. We can reduce our meat consumption, all right. This is certainly going to contribute. It would be worth doing it. But globally speaking, meat consumption will presumably further rise. And this means simply redistributing is going to be hard. And for this reason, I stick to it positively. We need technical progress. We need invent, adapt, research, realize into practice. We use digitalization, streamlining processes in agriculture, being more precise for digitalization. Many of you are closer to practice than I am, so you can judge that better, what options there are, and we'll have presentations along that this afternoon. This graph shows the past decades, how strong global agriculture has grown in percentages. In the 60s, for instance, we had about 2.8% production increase over that decade. And the graph shows that the USDA shows an estimate based on FAO data, shows what the sources of that growth were. Why could we produce more? Dark blue, this is more land taken under production. More land is simple. Then in orange, we have irrigation, improving irrigation. That also led to an improvement in gray or light blue. It looks like we have intensification. In particular, in the 1960s, the Green Revolution, it was called, more fertilizer. That had brought about considerable overproduction, but that turns out to be less over time, which is good. There are adverse effects from fertilizers, from intensification. There are limits to it. over-fertilization, other problems associated. So in the course of time, it became less important. What has become more important is what's shown in yellow. And this is a pure technical progress. This is the fact in the end that on the basis of better technologies, better breeding, better organization of processes, better use of information, that we have managed with the same input quantity to produce more or have the same input ratio with less. That is what mattered in the past of the recent decades, and also in the future, this will matter even more. Looking at the different sources of growth down below land, where do we want to get the land from? If so, it would be at the cost of rainforests or other spaces, which we do not want. Irrigation, certainly there are limits to irrigation, where it's fitting and where it brings output. Intensification is what we do rather want to reduce in certain areas of the world. Africa is one example, maybe, where there are spaces, all right, where more intensification would still be possible without a major environmental damage. But globally speaking, there are limits to it. Let me get to the farm-to-fork strategy. All in all, 27 measures. I've tried to count them, going through them. It's a very long catalogue. There's light and shadow. I say what's positive. It says promoting research and innovation, improved signaling of foodstuffs for foodstuffs. Digitalization is to be found in the strategy. There's also an indication, new innovative technologies, including biotechnology, and which is positive here in this catalogue. At the request of the member states, the Commission will do a study to identify the potential of new genomic processes to improve the sustainability along the food supply chain. I mean, that is a good thing to see. But there is also shadow, as was mentioned, two elements in particular that, in my view, are problematic. There's the reduction of plant protection agents by 50% and the share of ecological agriculture to be increased to at least 25%. I have my qualms about it. These are technical requirements regarding production which have not much to do with sustainability. The problem is lacking international leakage effects. They are not sufficiently borne in mind. Production downturns in the EU touch of global price increases. This is an incentive for expanding production elsewhere in other countries. They do not produce in a more environmentally friendly way than here necessarily. Global assets, global features, biodiversity, that will profit, all right, but elsewhere, the loss and damage will rise possibly. That's the problematic thing about it. And looking at the global features and assets, look at climate, the atmosphere doesn't care where emissions of CO2 are in this country or elsewhere. And so it may even be, given certain models, it's not easy to model, but it is possible production relocation reduce the efficiency of production here, that even more CO2 is emitted elsewhere below the line in the balance. It's hard to measure, I agree, but these effects are a risk. I will close with a final thesis, but it goes without saying, and this was also said in the discussion, global agriculture, we have to improve productivity in a holistic way. If I may turn back at the chart that I'd shown you before, criticize that chart. Where such computations are done, only the marketable input and output is borne in mind. And what's not borne in mind is the environmental effects, the adverse effects, that is cost, which is not included. And considerable costs were involved in the intensification of agriculture that we had in past decades. So the farm-to-fork strategy concern is not wrong. The approach has its issues, which is of concern in some aspects. And truly together, we have to improve the whole package engage it so that sustainability and supply is harmonized. And these are my theses. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to the discussion later on. Thank you so much. We're also looking forward to it, Mr. von Cramont. You just mentioned actually many of the farm-to-fork strategies angles are positive. Thank you for having outlined that to us from your point of view. Claire Bury, unfortunately, cannot be live on stage. She regrets, but she's connected to us. She will speak English, so you can switch over in the stream. There are headphones if you don't understand English. If there's unrest, you get them. We do have simultaneous interpretation, so you can follow that. Great to have the interpreters on board. Beyond the farm to fork, she will talk about the farm-to-fork strategy and explain where we stand. She's Deputy Director General of the Santé DG in the European Commission, and so the editor, so to speak. And she gives us an insight into the current state and the current rating of the implementation of the farm-to-fork strategy. Can we see her?
A warm welcome to Claire Bury. Great to have you here. This is your applause, Ms. Bury. So it's a pleasure, and the digital stage is all yours now.
So thank you very much, and good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't know where my morning went, but good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm sorry indeed not to be there in Berlin. It's a great city, a city that I love, and I happen to have my godson there, so I do come from time to time, but unfortunately I couldn't manage today. But I'm really happy to have been invited to discuss with you on the farm-to-fork strategy. Sven said I was the editor. That's not quite true. When I took over this job 2 years ago, I inherited it, so I'm more the executor, let's say, or the finisher, rather than the editor. Although, as I think you'll see, there's quite a lot of business in there, so I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take us to finish it. But I'm very happy to present to you where we've got to with the strategy so far. Talking through, I think, three issues. The first of all, the food security issue. I think the professor there has very much put it center of the discussions. And of course, this question of how security links with sustainability is something that keeps me awake at night. And I suspect some of you as well. The second thing is to update you on a few of the initiatives. And I'll talk about the pesticides one that the professor was quite critical about there, so that we can discuss that too. And then I'll talk more broadly about some of the tools that we think we have to make this transition to a sustainable food system possible. So first of all, on this question of food security, obviously when the Commission wrote the farm-to-fork strategy 2 years ago, the world was quite different. It was just as COVID was hitting all of us, and it was obviously, of course, well before the war in Ukraine. But I think the crisis that we've seen and the very hot summer and the difficult climatic conditions that we saw over the summer confirmed to us that really we can't stay with the status quo. And I think there's general agreement about that there's a link between food security and sustainability, and we can't just stay where we are, because otherwise the trees are going to be burning down around us, and we're not going to be able to, the farmers are not going to be able to plant the seeds and the grains that are so important to you. If we don't act now to do something about climate change and biodiversity decline. But obviously the economic consequences of the war in Ukraine have become very, very visible, and that is something that we need to factor into the work that we do. Overall, we would like our agri-food sector to be less reliant on external inputs, to be more resource efficient, to positively support the climate. So investing in sustainability is something which is a wise and economic and financial strategy. But as I was saying before, sustainability is also very essential for food security. So we in the Commission have taken some measures over the last 6 months, some short-term measures to deal with the problems that we've seen. There have been some derogations from the environmental provisions in the CAP. In terms of shortages of feed, we here and DG Sante have looked at what we might need to do in terms of residue limits from pesticides to make sure that if the imports are needed, they can be done and so on. So we've been dealing really with the urgent issues, but we also need to deal with the longer term issues related to climate change and biodiversity change. I want to underline, because obviously we strive for an EU approach, but we recognise that it's not one size fits all. There are differences in climates across the EU. There are also different crops that are grown, from cereals to fruits to vegetables, from aquaponics in cities to farming in the mountains. We know that agriculture is very diverse, and we also need to take that into account. I think I would like to also mention, I don't think the professor said it specifically, but I missed a little bit at the beginning, that there have been calls for a sort of overall impact assessment of the farm to fork strategy. And there are some, what we consider to be useful studies out there. And one of them is the Kiel University study that I think the Grain Club supported. These studies are very helpful for us because they give us useful insights about the different conditions in different member states, but also getting different data out there. But I think, as the professor's presentation showed, we have to be careful, and I would really agree with what you said, Professor, about the fact that we need a holistic approach. And the problems that the Commission saw with the existing studies is that they don't take all three dimensions of sustainability into account. So that is the environmental aspect, of course, the social and the economic sustainability. So the metrics, of course, I mean, you can always question a study because of the metrics, no? But we have to be very careful, I think, before we draw conclusions on the basis of certain metrics. The Commission has committed very clearly to do impact assessments on each of the individual proposals. And we've also, since the summer, been looking at the overall picture on drivers of food insecurity, and we'll produce a study on that, hopefully by the end of this year. I think we need a much more granular view of what factors are at play for food insecurity. I think this fits, Professor, with what you were saying as well, that we need to look, we need to have a better understanding of what's driving and the overall developments. And of course, we need to put that against the difficult economic backdrop of inflation, rising prices, and consumers and businesses being very squeezed between that. A sustainable food system is not going to happen overnight, that's obvious. It's complicated, it requires everybody in the food chain to be working together, to have common understandings of where we're going. So that's why it's important for me to listen to you today. It's also important for us to get more data on what's happening, and we have to do this together. It's not something where there should be too much farm or too much fork. We need to really make sure that it's working all the way along the chain. So I'd like now to move to a few of the farm to fork initiatives which are underway. I'll just mention 3 of those. As the professor said, there are actually 27. It sounds a lot, but it's not actually that much when you look at them. I want to mention 3 which I think you might be particularly interested in. The first is an initiative which is called a Framework for EU Sustainable Food Systems. This is really one of the flagship proposals. It's a horizontal proposal. It's meant to cover all the different sectors in the food chain. As I said a minute ago, one of the key things is getting all the actors in the food chain to work together, that we have a common agreed definition of what sustainability is and what it means, what our objectives are. And that's what this framework is intended to do. It may also propose some of what we call the pull measures, which is having better public procurement around sustainable food, having better labelling, better sustainable labelling. And we're also looking, but there I think we need to be very careful, at some minimum standards in different areas of food production. This I can see taking certainly quite a bit of time to put in place, and it needs to be done well. We have some metrics out there, as I've said. We have things like the product's environmental footprint, but it doesn't necessarily serve our purposes in the food industry very well. The second point I wanted to talk about was the plant protection products, the use of pesticides. As you said, Professor, the Commission has suggested in the strategy and now put it into a legal proposal that we should try and cut by 50% the use of chemical pesticides by 2030. Now, this might seem very ambitious to you, But last week in the Commission, we received on our desks a petition from across Europe, which filled the threshold for European citizens' petitions and initiative, which asked that we actually ban all chemical pesticides by 2035. Now, I think, okay, we have to listen to what public opinion is telling us, but we also have to be realistic. And we need to strike a balance between moving away from chemical pesticides, which are dangerous, very dangerous for biodiversity, can be harmful, and also can be for public health. But again, we can't do it overnight because chemical pesticides are crucial to our current productivity. So this needs to be done gradually. It needs to be done in a way where each member state can take their particular situations into account. And of course, we need to work on alternatives at the same time. And that's where we in the Commission are trying to accelerate now for getting other alternatives, the biopesticides, approved more quickly. You questioned as well, Professor, organic farming and the target of 25% by 2030. This, of course, well, I mean, organic, I think, is partly one of our success stories in Europe. And of course, if we can move to more organic farming, then it does help on a number of those areas like use of pesticides that we've identified. I mean, that's not to say that there are no problems with organic farm at all from a pesticides point of view, but there are, I think, fewer from a chemical pesticides point of view. But obviously, organic farm is not the only model. There are other models as well, like agroecology and so on, which may coexist. So I agree with you, it's not the be-all and end-all, but I think it can help us move in the right direction. But on the sustainable use overall, I would just like to underline that the Commission understands this is difficult. We understand that the proposal looks very ambitious. We understand that some of the scope and the definitions have been questioned. And we are very much listening to member states. I've had a number of, I'm pleased to say, well, obviously if there wasn't a problem, they wouldn't have come, but it was always very nice to have the German stakeholders as well in my office recently to discuss with this, but we are listening. And we want to find solutions, and we want to find a gradual approach, but we need to be moving in the right direction. Finally, on the initiatives, I want to mention the new genomic techniques, because things have moved on from what the professor said. We didn't just do a study. In her State of the Union address in September, Ursula von der Leyen said the Commission would come with a regulatory proposal on that, and we're working very intensely on it now. And I would expect that in the second quarter of next year, we will come with a proposal. For us, it's very important. Personally, I very strongly believe that biotechnology can be an answer to some of the problems that we're facing. But of course, it does entail risks. So we have to get the balance right. And we have to convince public opinion as well that these techniques, that we have the right kind of framework around them to protect from risks. And that's what we will try and do. But I understand for the farmers, this is an area where they're really asking us to let them have these tools in their armory and to put the right regulatory framework in place. So we will try from the Commission's perspective to respond. I know in Germany, again, because I've been talking to a number of stakeholders, that this is a controversial area, so I'm interested to hear your views. And finally, just a few words about the tools and initiatives to support the agri-food sector. Apart from the short-term measures that I mentioned already, we're looking at innovative ways wherever we can to support, for example, integrated pest management, which is at the heart of the sustainable use of pesticides, to see how we can deal with the protein shift in terms of nutrition. And as I mentioned, research, innovation and biotechnology have to be key in the transition that we want to make. So we're funding through Horizon Europe research and innovation. My sense, but again, I'd be glad to hear from you on this, is that we need to bridge the gap between the digital technology that's out there and the farmers, and them feeling that they will take the jump to use it, and they feeling supported both financially and in terms of the training and so on that they get for that. So to conclude, I think the transition is happening. The question is really how quickly we want it to happen and what we're going to do to make it happen. Without sustainability, there will be no food security, which is why we're doing this further study on what the drivers are for food insecurity, so that we can better target what we're doing and hopefully work with you and others in the sector and along the food chain to make sustainability work within Europe. We're not putting take it or leave it proposals on the table. That's not the way that the Commission operates. We come forward with proposals and we listen and we negotiate and we try and find reasonable solutions, but trying to maintain the level of ambition that we think is needed to meet those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire Berry.
You will also be part of our discussion, so you can listen and, of course, answer your questions, ladies and gentlemen. Before that, we will listen to another keynote, a keynote which gives a view above the EU. Kimberly Sawatzky is head of Agriculture Department of the US Embassy and a member of the Service of Agriculture. A great welcome. It is so great to have you here. Vielen Dank. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. So the EU's Green Deal and Farm to Fork and biodiversity strategies have global ramifications. And unfortunately, these include numerous negative impacts, including higher food prices, reduced global trade, lower production, and greater food insecurity. For more details on that, please refer to USDA's Economic Research Service study from November 2020. This was the first comprehensive study on the impacts of the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies. Subsequent studies, including by the EU itself, have come to similar conclusions. So while the United States commends and shares the EU's commitment to agricultural sustainability, we diverge in our approaches to achieving this goal. The United States believes that true sustainability entails 3 dimensions: environmental, economic, and social, and that only by embracing innovation and technology can we achieve all 3. There is no single or simple solution to today's challenges, but without a doubt, we need to, first, unite globally. The current global situation underscores the need for us to unite behind common principles and take action to end hunger and poverty, and to face the challenges of climate change head-on and build more sustainable and more resilient agricultural systems that can absorb future shocks such as pandemics, conflicts, severe weather, and climate change. Second, we need to produce more with less. By increasing agricultural productivity, increasing ag productivity is essential for meeting the needs of a growing global population. But to produce more while minimizing environmental impacts, we must commit to bold new approaches. So third, we must trust science. We simply must come together in support of science-based, data-driven decision-making. And only by leveraging innovation and science can we provide our farmers, fishers, and foresters and other producers with the tools that they need to improve productivity, sustainability, and resilience. We need to use all of the tools in our toolbox. We cannot simply categorize particular agricultural approaches or systems as sustainable or unsustainable. Truly resilient food production systems can be built by making the full range of global innovation available to farmers to tailor to their local needs. So innovation is key to meeting the global environmental and climate goals. And while modern plant breeding techniques are not a silver bullet, they are an important tool in our toolkit. So advanced plant breeding technologies are helpful not only for responding to the challenges presented by climate change, such as drought and pest-resistant crops, but also to mitigating further environmental damage through less tillage, lower energy use, higher yields, reduced erosion, and less moisture loss. However, it's critical for us to broaden the discussion on modern plant breeding and recognize that we need a holistic approach to agriculture. Despite attacks on agriculture and its effects on environment, the simple truth is that we have to eat, and farmers produce our food. We need to find a way to produce abundant, healthy, safe food in a way that causes the least damage not only to each plot of land, but also to the global environment. Population growth, combined with rising incomes across the developing world, will increase food demand by more than 50% by 2050. According to a UN and World Bank study, producing more food without dramatic increases in yields would require converting nearly 600 million hectares of additional land to agricultural use. So that's almost double the size of India, or nearly 17 times the size of Germany. The summary, we need to cultivate far more food on less land. And we can't do that by adopting or encouraging agricultural systems with lower yields. Quite simply, lower yields result in greater global deforestation. Nor can we achieve our goals by obstructing technological progress. So how do we address food security and climate change concerns? Well, technological innovation must be front and center for combating both issues, and we cannot achieve our goals for either if we don't embrace all technological progress. So for decades, genetically modified crops have been grown around the world, and they benefit farmers, consumers, and the environment. In the United States, advanced production methods facilitated by biotechnology, such as low-till and no-till planting, have greatly reduced energy consumption, soil loss, pesticide use, erosion, moisture loss, and greenhouse gas emissions while enhancing yields. So I'll give you an example. Since the 1980s, the US soybean producers have decreased energy use by 46%, decreased greenhouse gas emissions by 43%, decreased soil erosion by 34% per hectare, while production has increased 130%. So in 50 years, US soybean production jumped from 30 million to 125 million metric tons on less land. So in fact, over the last 4 decades, total cropland in the United States has decreased, while forest land has increased. Our higher yields have allowed us to expand our forests while still increasing agricultural production. Now that is sustainable agriculture. You know, sustainability is a buzzword throughout the world now. But in the United States, sustainability is nothing new. It's a historical cornerstone to our agriculture. The goal is to maintain, improve, and preserve natural resources for future generations while enhancing the quality of life for farmers and the society as a whole. American farmers live by the saying, we do not inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our grandchildren. So farmers, ranchers, and foresters in the United States have actively implemented sustainable agricultural practices since the Great Depression Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when unsustainable farming practices combined with a long drought caused major economic, social, and environmental devastation in our Great Plains. The US government stepped in to create soil conservation programs and seek new ways to balance agricultural productivity goals with environmental stewardship and conservation. So for more than 80 years, US government agencies have worked with agricultural producers to make conservation improvements to their farms, ranches, and forests, while enabling the adoption of new technologies and innovations that decrease resource demands. So these improvements help clean and conserve water, boost soil quality, restore habitat, and make our rural economies and agricultural operations more resilient and profitable. Technology and innovation have always been critical to US agriculture and land use efficiency. In 1960, one farmer in the United States fed 26 people. Today, that farmer can feed 155 people. So while the world needs to move to higher yields to feed a growing population and decrease greenhouse gas emissions, Europe is moving in the opposite direction. There's a disconnect between the EU's agricultural and climate goals, and it's clear that farm-to-forks policies will make global climate change goals less attainable. Agricultural production is a system, and if parts of the system are removed without providing effective alternatives, farmers cannot produce as efficiently or sustainably. The European Union has repeatedly attacked and restricted parts of the agricultural system, from biotechnology to pesticides to fertilizer and so on. And as a result, the system cannot function properly or as sustainably as it could if European farmers had the freedom to farm. Because farmers make the best and most sustainable choices when they have more, not fewer, tools at their disposal. So as Europe looks for climate change solutions, it's imperative that the decisions be based on science and not on propaganda, fear, or uninformed public opinion. We must let data and science lead the way. Thank you.
Gleich hier, take a seat. Und wir werden jetzt das Podium quasi wieder auffüllen.
So we will replenish the panel. Professor Dr. von Samon and Francois Holtenkamp. Gentlemen, just join us here. Do take your seats. Fresh with us, and an applause. Björn Myers, European Sales Director with Cargill Edible Oil Solutions, over 20 years of professional experience, and the chair of GROW for the wholesalers of oils and fats. So, representatives from industry, I'm happy to have you with us. And we will likewise have Claire Biori join us by stream.
Second, bevor wir das tun, gibt es hier aber noch 2, 3 kleine Informationen.
Before we meet you back here, we'll have a bit of information for the participants. Before we go into the discussion, we'd like to have answers from you, the audience, questions. As I said, in the stream, you may register your question, push the link, and you can use the QR code here, photograph it, and you will get onto the survey page. And for the first question, the question is where you can answer 1 or 2 or A or B, whatever. It's not particularly complex. Great, you have your smartphones out. We'll leave them on show here, the smartphone QR codes. The question is, what should policymakers concentrate on to regain the sustainability of the Farm Foam strategy? So that's one. Check it out, concrete implementation of measures like the reduction of plant protection agents and fertilizers. Or you say, no, you should in any case adjust that for an adjustment of the measures, for instance, by stronger, more bearing in mind technical progress. What we heard from Frau Sawatzki quite plainly, that the US banks on that very strongly. Take a few minutes' time. The response to the question will be shown later. I look forward to what your responses will be. But that does not get you out of it. We'll have the first panel discussion now. In many pages, on many sides, you heard from Brussels, you want to listen. They said, we want to listen. We also want to listen, understand where your sorrows are, what concerns you have, what questions you have of the panel, both in the stream. Like I said, you'll use the text box, and here, just raise your hand if you'd like to speak up, and then the microphone comes flying to you. It would be great if you would identify yourself and tell us where you come from, so we know what direction the question comes from, and address who you would like to ask if possible. So do make use of it. You're not going to have the chance so soon again to have a direct response. So to kick it off, what is the current situation? The current strategy, the current state of the strategy, how happy are you with it, what we've heard so far? How you haven't had the chance yet to speak up, so please explain what your point is. How do you feel about the Farm Fork strategy now? Sorry, the speaker has no microphone. Can you give the speaker a microphone, please? Right, that's much better. Sorry, the interpreters again have no sound input. My apologies, we have no sound input. The implementation should be pragmatic. It takes measures that can be realized, that are pragmatic. And here there are 27 measures. Personally, I say these are way too many. We must have clearer definitions. What is important is that we have a continuous exchange, as we have today, that you approach the farmers, approach industry. How can you help us in the realization? How much is that realistic? Holzenkamp, in the initial statements I heard, you would want to have a clear info from policymakers. My impression was that what Brussels said is, well, we'd like to listen, we'd like to adjust. How do you fare with that statement? Is that sufficient? No, that's not sufficient. Well, you see, the discussion has been ongoing for quite a while. We had the discussion, we had it during the initial part of the Ukraine war, and then there was an additional dimension because of that, because supply security globally and also in this country, but specifically globally, gained importance more and more. But the criticism, having lump sum figures, that's what I said in my introductory statement, rebutting the strategy, rebutting the criticism, irrespective of scientific review, irrespective of a review of impact assessment. That can be seen aside from the timelines. What is realizable, the lump sum statement that in certain protection areas from today to the next day, from time X, plant protection is 0. That is a target which sounds wonderful in society, maybe, but this is the way that policy making works. Unfortunately, it's a lack of technicality, lack of honesty. It's just not honest. And this is why, again, I feel it's a good thing. I'm happy that people listen well. What I would wish and what I expect is that listening has an impact, that it has an effect, a broader discussion, a more technical and expert discussion, a scientifically based expert discussion, and again, below the line, which the participants have said all along, it takes more sustainability. This is the mega topic of the future. We're living up to it. There are very, very many measures to be taken, yet the people have to come along. We have to take along those affected. Otherwise, it's going to not work. What's your bellyache? We've seen the charts, we've seen the numbers. There are a couple of parameters that you've shown what it will take in the future. Looking at it, and you have checked it out in detail, what Farm and Fork strategy was, how do we match that? Basically, I'm optimistic by nature, and I would feel we will make it work because we have to get it to work. Then again, these will be interesting negotiations and discussion over the next few months and years, maybe, till we've come to a point. Commission tables proposals. These are discussed. Commission listens. In the end, the Council of Ministers and the EU Parliament will vote. Until a compromise has been found, it'll take time. The process is hard and hard to predict. What I'm really worried, well, I'm not as optimistic indeed, is the communication. When I hear that there is substantially many people at the Commission seem to think that by 2035 we fully do without plant protection agents. That is something that does not work in communication. I wonder why they say so. We've tried in Göttingen to have a chair for science communication, specifically to have a look at those debates. That is something you want to go for. I've known from my work in RBB, I try to explain everything. It's not the same thing. It makes sense to study that. I've said that 2 million times maybe. So your problems are even more complex, and the consequences are. They're clearer, visible. That is the difficulty. And it sounds great to not employ anything, but it would be foolish not to have something to eat. We'll talk about that furthermore. Ms. Sawatzki, what do you say? Are you worried? You have a view from the outside, from beyond the plate. And you said how the EU handles it. They give farmers much more freedom to be creative, to be innovative. And Germany, after all, is known for its innovation power, isn't it?
Use it. Yeah, we're going to continue to have a brain drain in Europe and in Germany if Europeans and Germans aren't allowed to use the technologies and aren't allowed to implement them. I mean, I hear many stories of Germans who have plant breeding developments, et cetera, but most of them have to go to the United States or elsewhere to see those implemented. And if German farmers had the freedom to truly use all the tools, they would be far more productive, but also far more sustainable. You make each decision based on a plot of land, and each plot of land's needs are different. But my biggest concern is that everything has an impact globally. Lower yields result in greater deforestation. I spent 4 years in Brazil. I watched deforestation on a daily basis because they're feeding the world along with many other countries. So we need we need to allow farmers to produce as much as they can.
Herr von Kammer, Sie wollten darauf eingehen.
Can I maybe just add? I'm actually from Canada originally, and it is easier for us in North America, I think, to adopt some of these technologies, because I think the divide between agriculture and where people live and so on is bigger and different.
Yeah.
Farming takes place far away from the cities where people are. We have huge pub parks and unspoiled nature that people can enjoy. Whereas here in Germany, you live in a village and the farmer is plowing right up to your property line, so to speak. It's always right there. It makes it more challenging for us here.
I have said often the same thing. It's so close to people, where for us it's out of sight. It's much further.
Klassisches not in my backyard, right? Also die Windrad-Thematik, die kennen wir ja auch schon, meine Damen und Herren. Bevor wir jetzt gleich Frau Berry-Donald zu Wort kommen lassen, würde ich an dieser Stelle noch einmal ganz kurz die Regie bitten, uns mal die Antwort auf die Publikumsfrage einzuspielen. Also konsequent umsetzen oder schnell nachregeln.
Persistently do it. Can we have the monitors for that? Or redo it? Can I ask if we have the results? It was to be expected that they would say, everybody says so, included. We'd have to readjust that and have to find a consensus together. Everybody's agreed that's the right direction. Yes, we have to have more sustainability. How fast, how much, and with what means? Opinions do differ largely. For persistently implementing, that's 14%, and 86% are in favor of readjusting the measures. Thank you so much for having participated in our survey. It will be more complex in the next question, but you will have various options the next time round. But so far, thank you for participating. What is your current, what you've heard from the panel, and the worries and the concerns and the proposals how to do it differently? What's your response?
Okay, sorry, you're giving me the floor at this point, Sven, yes? It's a bit difficult to see whether you're looking where I am in relation to. Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. So I'd like to take, first of all, the point that came up very clearly in what the US representative said, and which was at the end of the discussion there about whether the EU is kind of technologically backward. I think, as the professor just mentioned, that public opinion in Europe is more difficult on technology. I know that from my previous job as well. But I think that there is an openness once people are convinced. They're not interested in technology as an end in itself. They're interested in technology as a means to an end. And if they understand the technology, the potential and what it can do and what the overall societal purpose and objective is, then they will go for it. So, as I said before, we have committed, the Commission has committed to make a proposal for a new regulatory framework for the new gene editing techniques, which we think are quite different from GMOs, and we think deserve a different regulatory approach. And I think that through that, we'll be able to unlock the possibilities of innovation and give farmers the extra tools that they are looking for. Of course, I aspire as well to that objective of farmers to be able to do what they do best and to do it as well as they can and produce as much as they can. I mean, I think we can all sign up to that. But yeah, we do have limited space, as the professor said, and we have different considerations that have to be taken into account. We have a different cultural approach. But I don't think that that means that we are not open to technology or technologically backward. I think we are open. And we will have what will be inevitably a difficult discussion with public opinion, but the Commission is ready for that and we will do it. I want to correct something that the Professor said, which, sorry, was it the Professor? Yes, I think it was. Because you said that the Commission had said we should ban all chemical pesticides by 2035. Sorry, that's a misrepresentation of what I said. I didn't say that at all. I said we had just received a communication from citizens saying, a petition saying that's what should be done. But our approach is to say that's very, very radical. We understand where citizens want to go, but we can't do that because we won't be able to produce the food. So our position is not ban immediately. It's reduce over a certain period of time and at the same time bring on stream alternatives so that farmers have those, and also open up with the new innovative tools, the new genomic techniques, and also with precision agriculture. I want also to say our decisions are all based on science. We have the European Food Safety Authority in Parma, and I'll happily take Kimberly there if she wants to go one day, and then she can see how many scientists we have sitting there and what they do. But it's all based on science. We have political decisions that are taken around the science because we do risk assessment and then we do risk management. That's our democratic process. That's the way it works. We're also cooperating with the US. After the UN Food Systems Summit, we joined the US Alliance on Sustainable Food Systems to discuss with them. I think also geopolitically the situation has changed hugely over the last 6 months, and there is a very cooperative engagement with the US. Of course, what we do has global ramifications. Anything in agriculture and environment has global ramifications, and the EU is changing attitudes, and we're leading on the Green Deal. So yes, it has an impact globally. I think I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Vielen, vielen Dank. Also ich glaube auch, das war
Thank you so much. It seems to have been miscommunication. You said it's about rather worrying that there are consumers out there who think by 2035 we'll just carry on without chemistry, without chemical agent. But that's a problem we have to fight with, grapple with in social media and social media channels, where everybody can say everything in society and with everyday life, and also in policymakers, that we have to grapple with that unfounded opinion, get an outreach, and then people say, let's do this way without the scientific background. Assuming that we have ideals, you all have the scientific background, I don't. In the EU Commission, in the end, the matter is political decision-making, and it's people who make politics. If people say we don't want more chemistry, then it's kind of failed. What I understood, everybody wants the same end and outcome. Nobody says we should not reduce. And you just said, Ms. Biori, we're reducing over a certain period of time. But now as an outsider, as a broadband layperson, I see two figures, several figures. For one, 2030, which is the day after tomorrow virtually, the numbers like by 50% reduction, which is half less. And times where it's not that way, that the farmer, I learned that in my capacity as a moderator of recent years, that he has pesticides or fertilizers like hell. It's a cost factor. They're cutting back and they're economizing. There are strong regulations already how much you may use. Are we still talking about the timing and these two numbers, or where is the difficulty? This is what I'd like to throw into the round. Yes, I'll be happy to. In the end, and I share your view, by nature I'm more of an optimist, you will find ways, we will find ways to go along, come along in these moving times. The democracy should show that we are in a position and able to master difficult future topics, to find a way towards solutions together. But again, I'd like to maybe set the footing for a broader discussion. It is about politics and trustworthiness and credibility. What we see in this crisis, it has a lot to do with energy, that enormous quantities of trust into politics has gone lost. In these moving times, this is a great risk. Trust is the most important currency that we have. And breaking that down to the farm-to-fork strategy, sure, it sounds great where you have extremely ambitious numbers, like the 50% cutback that you mentioned, Mr. Oswald, uttering it in that broad word term. Well, I think more highly of using concrete measures to make progress. Heinrich, in the Future Commission, we had a lot of discussion about quite different opportunities and options, how to get ahead. And all of us will have different compositions. We were agreed that concrete measures are required. For those measures also to have something to do with business, with economics. They have to figure out, otherwise they would not be done. And for the trust to remain, so that the outcry does not become bigger. What it takes is concrete approaches, and the discussion sort of goes past it. And politics going from the Commission is in a particular responsibility. Would anybody else want to comment? Otherwise, I would like to pick up another point. 25% of the spaces for organic farming is talked about. Now, looking at it as a consumer, currently we have the situation with Ukraine. Now, we have a problem that we are steering towards a recession. We have high inflation. And my experience is, and has been, that very many people are not truly minding if it's organic. And unfortunately, this is a problem, all right. But for all our everyday life, this is understandable. They don't bank on sustainability. The population does not seem to mind it so much. People are interested to see how they can feed themselves and their families. And there's not more money available. On the contrary, slowly, and over the next few years, maybe it's even less money that's available. Is it good at this point in time to say, after the learnings from Corona, and above all, what the lessons we've learned from the economic crisis, or will learn from the economic crisis, abide by the 25% level? Is that reasonable? Ms. Biori, maybe I'm wrong about it, but this is what I observe.
I said it in my first intervention as well, but the Commission projected this target of 25% organic. I mean, we have not, I just would say, we have not made a legal proposal to follow up on that. I mean, that's an aspirational target. Why? I said it earlier, because I think in terms of challenges for the environment, they are lesser with the organic farming. That said, it's not the only way of moving to sustainability. So we're not saying, you know, organic above everything else. It's one way of getting there. And I think, Sven, what you've said about consumers now in the current cost of living crisis, reaching for the calories on the shelf that will feed the family is a very valid one. And we see that there has been a decline in the sale of organic products. So for us, in terms of our policies, it's very much that this cost of living crisis is something that has to be taken into account. We have to see what's happening in the consumer behaviour, but I think, as I say, we can't abandon the medium to longer term objectives that we have of trying to improve the situation, because otherwise we're going to have the decline in the sustainability of our farming system and the resilience of it. I wanted to come back, if I may, just to something that Mr. Holtenkamp said. It's not, the Commission doesn't only work in political slogans. I mean, unfortunately, and you said it as well, Sven, the way that social media works and so on, kind of forces all politicians now into living by a soundbite. But those of us who work behind all that, because I'm not a politician, I'm a civil servant at the end of the day, I mean, what we have to try and do, nonetheless, is make sure that what we propose ultimately is as science-based and as evidence-based as possible. And sometimes it's very difficult to do that these days, I agree. But the Commission doesn't shy away from the technical discussions. I mean, on the sustainable use, we have put forward ideas about what to do on integrated pest management, what to do with the use of drones, how to approach the situation so that we can get to chemicals as a last resort. So, I mean, don't think that the Commission just kind of throws out the figures and then runs away from it. Far from it. I mean, we are still interested and believe as an institution that we have to back up what we do with evidence. But as you said, Sven, at the end of the day, you know, the politicians have to work in the environment that they've got, and you know, the court of public opinion these days is can be a very demanding one and a very severe one. As well, because consumers, yes, they want to pay less for their food, but they also want the environment to be protected, and they want better animal welfare, and they want everything else on top, no? And we have to somehow as well explain to them what can and can't be done, and what the tensions are in the food chain too.
Also, die Wahrheit ist immer...
So the truth is somewhere in the middle. You meant to comment. I feel that 25% is way too ambitious. Let's not forget, organic farming is one thing. You must ask what certification criteria are applicable to it. Maybe we can sort of implement it in Germany, but other countries in Europe or globally would have massive challenges implementing such requirements. Let's not forget, organic farming is one thing, but processing agricultural food further costs a lot of money, and there's a major point that the end consumer in the present phase find one thing is important, that's food security, but also at affordable prices. You see, you may talk about and think about alternatives such as you mentioned, sustainable products or products from regional farming. It doesn't have to be organic. I understand what you're saying. Important point, interesting point. In many places, the organic or conventional farming discussion, also organic farmers say in the end it will be somewhere in the middle. If it's at 25% organic or not, we will see later. Animal husbandry, animal welfare was mentioned. There are options to take a lot of money, and you have organic, you have stage 4 in animal husbandry, all begin with 2 or 3. Then as a consumer, you have an opportunity, okay, to say this is a middle way, this is an alternative, this is a compromise in the middle. Where you have questions, write it here in your text passage on your screen. This here is a microphone for those who attend here. Just raise your hand and we can get going. What I would like to do, let's play, I don't know if it's a worst case scenario, but just look at it. Just assuming we'll take the numbers, the 2030 and the 50% fewer pesticides, 25% organic farming and the other 25 points in it, and we'll play it through. What would happen? You were just talking from business point of view. What would be the consequences for us in Germany and in Europe? Hard to say. I feel the consequences would be massive. I think economic competitiveness probably would get lost. Many companies would reconsider, well, maybe you go into other countries elsewhere in the world. The Silicon Valley of farming? Well, maybe to Asia, maybe elsewhere in the world. You know, you would not be competitive anymore. Production costs would go through the ceiling right now. We've seen with the war in Ukraine how important it is to have open borders so that food may move. Right now, 20% of all food products are moving across borders somewhere in the world. If you narrow that down, have too high criteria, the impact can be massive. Mr. Holzkamp, the consumer, I don't care if there is chemistry or not. I don't care if you're working economically or not. What's that mean for the farmer in Europe and in Germany if that were realized? And what would it mean for the consumer in the end? Well, such a scenario would come about. Well, nobody would listen. It would not just be a framework, or the EU countries would make that work by 2030. Again, if it were uniform one-to-one implementation, if it were, we would at least have a level playing field within the European Union. Then we would go under together. Well, a large part of the production that differs in climate zones from country to country would move elsewhere. Looking at the situation, breaking it down to Germany, what do we experience now? For one, we have the shopping attitudes. Because of the crisis situation, we've described that. This is the way we see it. This is what statistics show, what surveys show. I'll take an animal husbandry pork production. Pork has gone down by 25% in recent years, so I have to adjust production. That was number one. On the other hand, within Europe, meanwhile, we lose competitiveness. The Spanish produce at a lower price with lower standard that we have. And they have Iberico as marketing. Well, Iberico indeed is a delicious, delicious pork ham. But apart from that, special products exempted. I mean, special products are special things. But what it leads to is that the structure, we're just before the decision, if we have a rupture in this segment, in the structure of the segment, and this is quite current, and this is what decides over the next few months whether a large part of a bulk of the producers moves away from this field. And in parallel, we have a development that the specialist parts of animals are imported from other countries. And the heading is sustainability. Remember, the real point about the result is that climate change is not helped this way, because what it leads to is that production is done through leakage effects elsewhere and is moved to other countries. And this is why the measures that we need to take, that's a whole bunch, also ecological measures, yes, but also innovative measures, as Professor outlined before, in plant protection, in fertilizers. Believe me, one final remark, permit me, on organic, the 25%. I said with respect to the 50%, extremely ambitious numbers mean nothing. I don't think highly of them, rather. Chiefly what I think of is those farmers that do have organic farming. That's about 10% in Germany now. Where those markets are artificially pushed, what will happen in the segments who for many, many years with lots of power worked for a high price level? What happens to those conventional farmers? What happens to them? I don't want to go for a particular number, but these are processes that you need to support, have to develop further. But in the end, what's much more decision for the entire sustainability issue, we as a whole are in an ecologic process. Conventional farming learns from organic farming, and the other way round likewise. There are problems as well. Only ecological farming, where we have, say, double the space that we need, roughly double the space, is not a solution for the supply security. It's a complex topic that you have to do justice to. And also to the consumer, of course. Where the consumer says, I don't want an organic apple, I want a regional apple, for instance, from next door. You must have a choice as a consumer and not be forced to buy organic, even if it's from elsewhere. From your point of view, briefly, you gave us the numbers. If we pull it through, what would happen to the people? Those, the many that are starving, and the more that will be starving. Estimates, I have not seen any estimates on that. Mr. Swatsky mentioned the Kiel study. The USDA has a study on a similar question, and the Seville study from the Commission. But throughout, you will read that production volumes drop and global prices rise. What impact this will have in concrete on the number of those starving or living in hunger is hard to say. I have not seen figures. Where food prices rise, the impact globally is a bit complicated. Many of the poor households out there in developing countries also produce agricultural produce. So there's subsistence farming households where prices rise. There are mixed effects. That's not only negative. For the municipal, for the city folks, that's a problem. But many in subsistence farming, poor households in developing countries, that's a mixed result, depending what exactly they produce, what they buy in, what they sell in foodstuffs. If household members work on neighboring farms and have wage income that might rise. The World Bank has figured it out a few years ago, and they say the impact on poverty is pretty complicated and not easy to underpin with a number. Right, let's look what the international markets say. Professor Matzke, if the strategy were to be implemented like now, what impact would it have, for instance, on trade between the US and the EU?
Depends on how much the European Union tries to impose farm to fork on other countries through trade agreements, through trade restrictions. And I know that we hear that they won't, but we've heard this for many years on many issues. And we do fear that it will affect trade. We know that farm to fork, regardless, will reduce trade. To the extent that it will is the question. And I think the bigger concern is not the United States. The United States and Europe, we have the money overall to buy more products. It's the developing world, the poorer countries that don't. And some of those countries depend on the European market, and they'll feel compelled to comply with the same farm-to-fork requirements, and that will cause greater food insecurity, higher prices again, reduced trade among others. So it's not the United States, even in Europe, it's beyond that's the concern. One thing for Claire, I have great respect for EFSA. They have great scientists. What I wish is that European decision makers would take more of that science and implement it. There's a disconnect between EFSA's determinations and what happens in EU policies. But I have great respect for EFSA and have worked with them over the years. Thank you.
Jetzt hat Claire Berry ja auch gesagt.
Claire also said they want to listen, and she keeps listening here all the time. If I understand her right, it's not about concrete laws. It's about creating a framework, sort of a superstructure where each country in the EU makes its own laws in a certain framework. What, from your point of view, would happen? I mean, you've known the strategy better than I have, maybe better than all those present here. What's the optimum which an individual country could come out of it or should come out of it?
Art Wunschgesetz.
If you could wish for legislation, what is the one you would wish for?
Sorry, that's a good question. No, sorry, let me hang on. Let's just get back to basics, because the Farm to Fork is a political document. No, it's a strategy which sets out proposals in different areas. What I talked about was the framework for sustainable food systems, which would be a new. I mean, back in 2002, we had something that was called the General Food Law, which was when we really basically had our fundamental food law in the EU. So what we're thinking about here is a new sort of update of that. So it would be a framework for the systems in terms of extending it beyond food safety to cover food sustainability and defining what that means. But of course, as I said, it's not one size fits all. We have to take account of member states' particularities. So there'll be some areas where I think it'll still be for member states to define exactly what needs to be done, taking into account their particular issues. But I wanted to give a bit of a reality check as well when we're talking about the targets, because I know the 25% target, and Herr Holtenkamp has said, aspirational targets, politics in this way, it's of limited effect. But at the moment already we have countries like Estonia and a very close neighbour to Germany, Austria, which have more than 20%. So some of those countries already go over, and of course that will tip the balance in a certain direction in terms of getting to 25. I mean, similarly, on the pesticides in terms of reducing, the EU average is already around 17% reduction. So, I mean, the direction of travel is already very clear. I mean, what we're talking about is putting in place measures that nudge that to happen more quickly so that we can get there within a reasonable timescale. But of course, there will be differences for member states in terms of the level and what they've got to reduce. Some member states, we have two categories of types of pesticides. And the ones where we're really concerned are those which are the most hazardous. And some member states still have an increasing consumption of those, and therefore they will need to do more there. So I think it's about, I don't know, I hesitate to use the term, but it's the one that comes to mind most quickly here, which is kind of burden sharing. Within the EU, we do this all the time. We look at what our overall objective is, and different member states make different contributions, but we need there to be an overall sense of fairness, and of course there needs to be an overall sense of transparency as well. I mean, there was talk of competition, and this is something that very, very often comes up, which is if we're going to ask our farmers to be more sustainable, if we're going to ask them to do more with less, if we're going to ask them to do better, then we need to make sure that the imported products, that we are looking at what happens there. Now, our approach in Farm to Fork has been very much to reach out, to discuss with other countries, both on a bilateral and a multilateral basis, and to see where we can agree things, which was why I was referring to the UN Food Systems Summit follow-up and the discussions that we'd had with the Americans. And I sense, I'm not sure I hear it in everything that Kimberly says, but certainly I hear from what I've been hearing from her colleagues, that there is really a very, very clear sense of wanting to engage with us on that, so that we avoid going in unilateral directions. I mean, ultimately, the EU takes its own decisions. I hear what you say about the fact that you think that EFSA's scientific views are not always taken into account, but I mean, a lot of my colleagues put themselves on the line every day to go into the Parliament to try and explain why that the science should be taken into account. And as you know, I mean, we have decision-making procedures as well, which mean that on occasion the Commission is left, as we say very poetically, holding the baby, and we are the ones that have to take the very difficult decisions that nobody else wants to take, but we do it, and we do it on the basis of the science. Thank you.
Ist natürlich aber auch immer.
But it's kind of difficult time and again, isn't it? When the decision is on the table, the consumer will say, oh, genetic engineering, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Easily get into what we call devil's kitchen. It's about the superstructure framework. Well, we say this is what it is. Can we lean back and say, we can move freely in this framework? Mr. Halskamp. No matter what objectives they go for, you have to have a framework. I mean, we're not at dispute over that. We agree on that line. The decisive thing is how you make it work to set and to develop milestones which are sufficiently realistic and which can also be implemented sufficiently, in fact. But I stick to my statement. You also have to work towards confidence, political confidence as well. That's what you need to work for. And the one or other thing, also currently in our country, a lot gets lost. And there's a risk of a lot of confidence getting lost. This is a risk indeed. I plead for agreeing on steps, agreeing on milestones and working them out, which are accepted by either side. There are examples from agriculture. In Lower Saxony, where I have the pleasure of being at home, there's a Lower Saxon way. President of the Agricultural Association is here. He has co-developed that in Baden-Württemberg. We have similar strategies. The agricultural business, agriculture, is willing to undergo change, and they show by concrete examples. Just, it needs to be realizable. And a final comment. Personally, I'm extremely freedom-loving. I think we all are, sort of. I can only live in a society where surely you have a setting, but within the setting, you must have confidence and trust that the practitioners on site do it right and implement it the right way. A framework, yes, but a realistic one. Right, we have a first question from among the audience. Would you identify yourself? Michael Reiniger, Deutscher Raiffeisenverband. Thank you for the lots of info. Right now, I have an eerie feeling. Professor von Gramont gave me that feeling, interpreting his presentation in a loose way. We'll be getting an increase in the population. Population keeps growing. They will eat more meat. And either we will have billions of starving humans in the world, or it takes a gigantic brainwashing program worldwide, eat less meat. This is the scenario that I have on my mind now, and we're steering towards a truly serious problem. In the media, I keep hearing or reading, well, you just have to eat less meat, and there's a distribution problem. That's something entirely different. So I wonder, science, have they not managed to take this problem into the public? Climate change took a long time, but meanwhile, everybody is aware of it. Well, sort of. But what we've got here with full swing and full power at short notice within 20, 30 years, what we are facing is not what people know. Most people know about. If we were aware of that, we ought to talk about different things than plant protection by cutting that back by 50%. Was a problem of science communication, sort of, right? Thank you for the input. Indeed, this is a big challenge. The global trends are risky if we carry on this way. Still, I'm kind of more optimistic than I think you are. What the graphs do not show, sort of, are price effects. The demand for meat, if it rises accordingly, then prices will go up. That will balance that sort of. But again, with a global look at it, it's important here, if we understand that our meat consumption was meant to be reduced, but globally it has to have that effect. And countries such as China have a real side effect. When will the Chinese company run a campaign? When will the Chinese government run a campaign? That's good for our health, that's good for our environment, and it's good for us being less dependent on imports. China, where they are dependent, truly, where they're vulnerable, is over 100 million tons soy is imported for the processing industry in China to be maintained. There are some hopes I harbor that insofar it will not go up that much to reach the level that we have in the US, in Argentina, and other countries in terms of meat consumption, or in Brazil. That was peaking, wasn't it? Right. But certainly this would be a major lever where many people would see the impact. Another question from the audience. Tell us I'm Holger Ennis, Lower Saxony, Farmers President of Niedersachsen, Lower Saxony. A question to Faburi. I'm very much surprised that the strategy is seen as a framework. I've rarely seen an EU regulation which is so much in detail and so much penetrates onto the states, the member states. The written protection areas lay down pretty specifically where bans, 100% bans, shall apply. This is going to be a regulation with a high depth, a high intensity. Also, the regulation on the application, it goes deep down into the rights of member states. If you would call that a framework, then a directive would have been appropriate. But this is a regulation. And the protection areas, 30 to 50% of member states are concerned. It has this weird, any of these is included. This means large parts, large areas, nature conservation, water conservation are concerned that have a total ban on plant protection agents. And the second step is that consensual models like we have in Lower Saxony, nature conservation cooperating on the local level, have no basis at all because on site they have no designing option. They can't pay for programs. Even if they do for nature conservation, it's not going to get paid because it's monitored and banned from up there. Were those aspects borne in mind at all?
So I should first of all clarify that when we're talking about sustainable use of pesticides, indeed it's a regulation. When I was talking about the framework, I'm talking about the framework for sustainable food systems. We need to go back to it again. The strategy has 27 actions. Some of them are legislative, some of them are not. One of them is the framework for sustainable food systems. There is no proposal yet. We're still discussing that. But the proposal for a regulation, indeed it is. You're absolutely right, and I don't dispute that. For a regulation on sustainable use of pesticides. Of course, consideration was given, and we worked very closely with our colleagues that work on environmental issues. And many of the definitions on the sensitive areas come from pieces of legislation in the environmental field, which has been interpreted by Germany as well in terms of which areas fall within the different pieces of relevant legislation and within a database which lists sensitive areas. Now, I think there are two things in what you raised, which is one, is it appropriate to have a total ban in all those sensitive areas? I think that's certainly something that has to be discussed. To my mind, in certain of the areas, a total ban isn't appropriate. I think in some areas using the chemical pesticides, if, for example, it's a public area or an area which people who are in a sensitive position have access to, then we need to be much more careful about the chemical pesticides. But if we're talking about agricultural areas and the chemical pesticides are needed, that's a different type of situation. So I think I agree with you about the fact that the total ban is potentially very far-reaching, probably needs to be scaled back in certain aspects. On the question that you raise, and I'm very much aware of this now because I've been talking to, in fact, representatives from Lower Saxony as well about it. We understand very well now what's happened in Germany in terms of the consensual agreements that have been reached there between the farmers and the non-governmental organisations that work for the environment and so on, and the kind of targets that you have set there, the kind of supporting measures that you've said, and I've encouraged the farmers' associations as well to come forward with those so that we have a much better understanding of them. Of course, at the end of the day, it's Germany that signs up to the regulation, and it'll be a German national target that's set. And of course, we would encourage the regional arrangements to be taken into account in that respect. And it's very interesting and important for us to understand exactly what the impact is of what's been agreed at regional level and the direction of travel and what you're doing, because I think this really is very good practice which can be used in the rest of Europe. So we are aware of it and it will be taken into account.
Das ist jetzt natürlich schon so ein bisschen yay.
This is yay or nay. We'll see if it gets to be signed or not. There's a show of hands here. We have chat questions, of course, now that the time runs out. Thank you for coming in. Hosenkamp. I'm an oil miller, and I've contacted your grassroots. I'm a market leader. Food oils, I have 700,000 tons of rapeseed per year, apart from sunflower oil and others. So for one, the confidence into agriculture as a whole in the grassroots people, the working farmer, and the people who are active in the groups, who are lobbyists, who get the good work that we do, get it across to Berlin and Brussels. Yes, there is confidence. The problem rather is that regarding material issues that are seen by the experts likewise, that Brussels in part goes past the technical questions in their rulings, in their governing. We see organic oil, for instance. Organic oil goes down. Why? People have not enough money. Why don't they have enough money? Among other things, because of the European Central Bank, as an example. This is to say confidence into those governing is decreasing. So many questions come up. What about the safety of oil mills vis-à-vis governments and ministries? Of course, we have to say the Black Sea region problem has to be solved, no doubt, as soon as possible. Then comes the next question from our customers. The elderly, you will remember, we remember Chernobyl, 1986. We at the oil mill, any ship that came in was scrutinized for any atomic outfall. These are fears and climate change. We checked out the becquerel at that time. So because of Brussels, it will go up to your pace with organic space allocation. Efficiency indeed is very bad of the organic seeds. You must tell the ladies and gentlemen in Brussels are totally counterproductive. At the time of climate change, when loads of spaces worldwide get lost, to now say we're extremely going for organic production. It's not going to work, and it's too expensive either. In conclusion, what it takes, Mr. Hosenkamp, or some of the other gentlemen, also specifically to you, what it takes. We're active in research. There's not going to be hunger in the world as such. I'm among prominent farmers or the representatives of farmers. The technology is coming up with respect to chemical production of albumin is available. There's no hunger in the world because the planet could not produce it. No, because we do stupid things, such as the war in Ukraine. And to round off, we clearly need to say that if we get a fallout from an atomic blow, and be it tactical atomic weapons only, then we have a problem, quite clearly, quite clearly. This is very broad, a very somber scenario. Thank you. Good impression. Let's see what feedback we're getting, what feedback you're getting from consumers and your staff. Right now, we're almost at the end of the time allocated. One more request, that you wish something. You can wish it amongst yourselves, or wish it from the consumer, or wish it from the European Commission level. If you had one wish free, what would need to happen for a better, for a good, or more meaningful direction to be gone down to? How it's going? I have so many wishes, you know. Just one. In concrete, with respect to this topic, more matter-of-factly approaches, no ideology, more expert knowledge, more science, and in the end, you said, it's about efficiencies. For that, we're not getting a regulation top-down, but a framework within which the individual regions can be heeded in Germany, in Europe, and that we can live them. And I think that trust and confidence in the people is required. That seems to have been lost up there. I want to abuse the panel. Some of the wishes will rather be uttered by others. I'm a dean of the agricultural faculty in Göttingen. It would be great if we had sufficient basic financing for research in German universities, which we do not have. This is a problem. Where research and training doesn't get financed, we don't have the research to follow. We lack the people then who can solve the job. You need a skeleton, not just a superstructure from regulations. Professor Watzke, what's your wish?
Making is based on science and data and not on uninformed public opinion, and to invest in also educating the public.
Das wäre auch mein Wunsch an so vielen.
This would also be my wish in so many places. Herr Mayer, what about you? My wish would be that the impact on the global trade should not be underestimated, that you bear in mind what consequences might follow from it, and that we don't see that production leaves Germany and Europe. Thank you so much. And finally,
All the wishes of all the people here. What would be your wish, actually?
we heard all the wishes. What do you say?
I'm going to be offer an olive branch here and say that I want to agree with Kimberly about the fact that what we need to do is invest in educating people to understand more about the food chain, what it is, and including in that the potential for new technologies, which will keep the European agriculture system and its businesses fully competitive. Thank you.
Vielen, vielen Dank, Andrea Berry. Und in die Richtung wäre auch.
Thank you ever so much, and that would be one of the questions from our chat. We have no time left for it. So for you out there, it will come this afternoon. Ask your question. I will ask them. Right now, this is the time is up. Thank you very much for your time and for the highly interesting discussion. Thank you for your attention. We have a break here on site. You can also have a break at home and refill your coffee pot and walk around the desk once. That's good for your body. We'll be back at 1600 with the second part. We'll look at the Green Deal, reaching targets by research, innovation, best practice, where everybody says it has to go this direction. Underpin it with facts. Enjoy the break. Thanks for now. We'll be back soon.
We are coming back to the second part. We already had a very exciting first part. If you join us just now in the stream, we had very exciting views that you missed. We talked about the farm-to-fork strategy of the EU Commission and about the challenges, and also now in the second part we will talk about how we will be able to reach the goals of farm-to-fork and still have the food supply with the help of the best practice examples. Now it will be a little more concrete in the second part. I'm looking forward to it because there are so many beautiful, innovative examples in the German agriculture, but also in Europe. And we will start with 3 little keynotes from different viewpoints. And after that, we will meet again in a second panel discussion. And here comes a message for you on the computers. You can ask questions. We have the little window for questions, and ask them fast, because then I am able to ask them. It was a little bit, I had too little time in the last time, but I will try my best to also ask your questions. And for those who are here with us, just raise your hand and then the microphone will come to you and we will be able to talk to each other. We will start with a keynote from business with Dr. Jörg Müller. He is a manager, environment and technology in the plant conservation department in the Association of the Crop Protection and Fertilizer Industry. He gets a 90 calories applause after this cake. Welcome. Mr. Müller, the stage is yours. Have fun. Is that the pointer? Yes, that is the pointer, but the pointer will not be visible in the stream. Green is the next presentation. Okay, let us start. I am happy that I have 10 minutes. These 10 minutes scared me tonight. Mr. Kolber called me and asked me if I will be able to do it. 9 slides in 10 minutes. Now I am a little more relaxed because a lot has already been said. I will just quickly go over it after the break, and then I will maybe give you some new ideas that we have not been talking about today. We have already talked about the triangle. We have great challenges. Some of them are a little older, some have been a little more prominent, but there is a problem that has to be solved. We were talking about food security, but I thought that is not a new problem. I will show you a number. 7 million hectares are imported into Germany. We only have 16 million hectares at our disposal. So before the energy crisis, we have been living over what we can achieve ourselves. The EU also increases imports 30 million hectares. We already talked about the incomes of farmers. They should be good, and also the prices of food shouldn't be too high. These are also examples that are talked about in the farm-to-fork strategy. It's not only about environmental protection. And we also already talked about one central aspect that should be made into law. That is extensivation. So using plant protection and fertilizers, and also prohibitions of plant protection agents in some areas. But the question is, will we reach our goals? We heard today that there will be negative consequences, but is there a win? I will show you a quotation from an impact assessment in order to be able to conclude the final impact of the report for EU of the Commission. It is very improbable that we will reach our goals for biodiversity by prohibiting plant protection agents. That means we can look forward to marginal effects, But with this impact assessment, we will not reach our goals. We were talking about the studies from the University of Kiel, for example, and they all reached the same results. There will be the productivity will decrease, but this is something that everybody has in common. Our dependability on import will increase, and we will depend on other parts of the world. And the studies also say that the earnings of farmers will decrease and the prices of food will increase. That is also maybe the conclusion of the first part of today. But what is the alternative? Innovation, of course, we have talked about innovation. Our members work on innovation, digitalization, for example, in order to decrease emissions and also address the problems of our world. And of course, agricultural policy. And for me, I think it is not too complicated because everything that I will show you is already known. We have known this for 10 years now. We have programs in all the German lenders. What should be cultivated? How big should the fields be? And we have also something called EDAF areas that are there but are not used, but also don't have an ecological footprint. It's about 2 to 6% of the fields in Germany. If extensivation is not the right way, what is it? How does intelligent biodiversity support work? We have to report to increase habitat change. And how can we reach these goals? I will describe 4 principles which are very abstract, but also another example from my hometown. One of many projects that are German projects. One of this project is about the support of partridges and field hamsters. And so we can see if these fields are intact. The first principle is a focus on the natural environment. In this example, we have 5 communities in this project. They're in different areas, but have the same agricultural area. The next principle is cooperation and coordination. In this project, we have 9 authorities, 6 NGOs, for example, the environmental protection, and 35 farmers. And there is a coordination of a workplace that is coordinating and helping with the signing of contracts. And last but not least, appropriate funding rates that should be increased a little bit, but in this case, the support is higher than in the agricultural environmental program. So there should be a motivation to support, because money here is very important, and also for the conversation of the farmers. That picture has been a little more colorful, but I hope you can see. So what could be the results if we follow these principles? You can see little measures of different kinds, but it's not a huge area. It's 35% of the area that has been used, where biodiversity measures have been used and successively increased over the last 3 years. And we see that in these 3.5%, we had great results. When you look at the partridges, we had more than 10 pairs per 100 hectares. And you can see the same thing for the field hamster, they are not very easy to support, but we can see great results in the last 3 years. And how much yield does this cost? If we don't use 3.5% for production, it costs this amount. And this means, of course, earnings for the farmers. But if we think a little further, for example, the landscape structure and the EDA areas, we can use riparian strips that we have in Germany, and we can improve them. And we can also improve these EDA areas. We could talk to the Deutsche Bahn and talk about how we could improve these areas. And we could also improve these brownfields that we have. But the great thing about this is we don't have the decline in earnings and also no opportunity costs. But are these goals affordable? This is a very important question. And I tried to do the math here. A lot of the numbers are not important for you. But what would the project for Gießen cost if you would apply it to the whole of Germany? In Gießen, it costs about 200,000 euros per year, and 150 of those goes to the farmers. If you apply this to the whole of Germany, we would have to pay 600 million euros. If we also apply the other ideas, we have some affordable results. So we add another 6.5% for only 300 millions. That is a bargain, if I can say so. So we reach 900 million euros. That is a number, and we can't really put it into context. So the eco schemes, the funds of the first branch, we have about 1 billion euros. So the money for this targeted agricultural support was there, but the decision was made to use it differently. But I think that it would actually be possible. And I would like to sum up what I have said. The question was, is it effective? And is it efficient? Talking about the farm to fork strategy. Looking at biodiversity, the impact assessment says there is no real progress. We have the earnings of the farmers, and the food prices go up, and we cannot really support ourselves with agricultural resources. So for me, I think it is not effective when looking at biodiversity, and also not efficient. This is why we, as the EVA, we say that we should follow these cooperative measures because they are not easier to apply but they also have greater potential.
Vielen Dank, Herr Müller.
Thank you so much, Mr. Müller. You helped me because in the second time, we will talk more about this. But these are expensive hamsters, let me say so. Okay, we will go on with another keynote. I will welcome the head of corporate public affairs, head of digital farming, lead expert agribusiness, BayWa AG. He is an expert on digitalization and smart farming, and he is one of our brothers. Thank you so much for being here. A warm applause. The stage is yours. Have fun. Okay, first and foremost, I do agricultural trade, and we are those that for generations have been helping the farmers to bring these generations to life. And if we succeed, we get money and we can continue these innovations. And I will not be talking about theoretics, but I will talk about one example, the site-specific fertilization. What positive does it bring us, and how can we use it more often? What is the site-specific fertilization? If you take a walk on Sunday and you look at a field, it is very green, but if you fly over the field by plane, you can see that there are a lot of spots on the field, and they are nothing else but very small differences in the yield potential. The soil is a little different, the microclimate is a little different, and this site-specific fertilization uses satellite data and algorithm models to compute what does this mean for the fertilization. How much fertilizer does the plant need in the next days? That is the site-specific fertilization. If there is a tractor with a system and a fertilizer spreader, and he can use the data they can use in the moment 10 by 10 meters, and in 10 by 10 meters use these information very specifically. What does it bring for the farmers? Of course, more money in the wallet. If they already have the tractor or the fertilizer spreader, we have a break-even starting at 20 hectares. So this is not only applicable for big operations. The question for the lane guidance system is not really applicable anymore. This should be usable for all operations, especially viewing at the increase in fertilizer prices. The break-even comes even earlier. There are a lot of studies on this. For example, the government of the Oberpfalz, they say that the site-specific fertilization decreases the washout of nitrate into the groundwater. And with this technology, we can also, in these red areas, these systems can also optimize yields with less fertilizer. Now you say, cool, all the farmers should do that, but that is not the case. Only a small part of the farmers use this technology, and there are a lot of scientific surveys as to why this is the case. We made other experiences in the practical field. For farmers, the biggest point is that the systems do not work properly at the moment. They want to fertilize. Saturday night, they want to fertilize their fields. And if they need to study in informatics in order to use the system, that is difficult. And we can solve this with integrated systems. The specialists among you know what I'm talking about. We cannot solve these problems with the state island solutions. And the role of the agricultural engineering is also often overlooked. It is often looked at as an IT topic, but farmers need people. Even if they are more and more digital, they need people to talk to in order to have confidence in the systems. If the farmers cannot solve these problems alone, they have to have the confidence that there is somebody there who will take on the problem. That makes a huge difference. Of course, the island solutions are a problem for a long time and have been a problem for a long time, and they are to be solved. But also in a private business, we have to work on these problems. we were talking about this at the Fraunhofer Center. Of course, there are solutions which are already ready. I don't understand why we do not put our money on these systems, but keep discussing. Of course, we also need a partition of roles between state and business, but I want to keep this topic for the panel discussion. It's a huge topic. Of course, we also have to look at the negative impact on business. But one thing that is also very important and that I miss at the moment, and I thank Mrs. Sawatzki for the clear words that she used. The incentives for the farmers to use digital tools are not there. Of course, there are support programs, but the software is missing. And I also miss precision farming in the eco schemes. And of course, it is very important. It's not too late. I hope that the precision farming or precision engineering and also the farmers that use this technique will be able to be supported by the European Union. At the moment, only the ecological farming is supportable. If we use these systems in an intelligent way, we can set a framework that the farmers and also the business have more incentives to be innovative.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back on the panel later. We have another small input from the area of environmental protection, Christoph Heinrich. Join me here on stage. Of course, an applause is his. Great to have you. Since 2004, he has been the Nature Conservation Director at WWF Germany. His focus is climate protection, reducing the ecological impact, and protecting species internationally, but also here in Germany. We look forward to your input and then for you to take part in the discussion. Thank you. You've noticed the focus, climate and then everything, an ecological footprint, the whole biot, planet, and no, that's not a focus. We're an international organization. I head it in Germany. Why am I here? Agriculture is very dear to my heart. It's an incredibly important and beautiful topic. It has a certain passion that it has touched off, but despite all the passion, I'm not an expert. Maybe it's good that still I'm here. We have lots of experts here. I have sort of an eagle's view. The face-to-face farm-to-fork, F2F, farm-to-fork. Only yesterday when preparing it, it became plain to me. I mean, I have a different mindset. I opted to stick to the old mindset. But that has a lot to do with farm-to-fork. What I was wondering, the approaches are correct and good. I looked at it again, and right now, during we discussed it, I looked at it again. I can't find it wrong what they say. But still, I feel that it's not seen as an offer to farming. As I said, a good concept, as I feel. Why is it meeting with resentment, with resistance? Why is it not seen as a positive offering? And that's driving me around. I mean, it's important for me that we're dealing with it. How do we get from this unfavorable underlying situation where for years and decades partly we've been seeing ourselves as losers? I perceive there's high dissatisfaction amongst farmers. You can't reject that. This is a fact. The economical situation differs. They're not only losers, but all in all, I see the sector to be dissatisfied. There are normal downs in nature. We nature conservationists are positively dissatisfied. So would nature, if they had a voice, and also the animals in the stables are unsatisfied, and I don't hear different from the consumers. Due to time, I would like to follow up on the question where everybody suffers from things. Should not then everybody have a strong interest in finding common solutions and talking about that. And this is a driving engine. I think the intensive discussions that we were forced into, I thought something like 100 meetings in working parties. There was no way around listening to one another and talking about solutions. I won't go into all the details. I understand it's got to be brief. I had one interesting parallel. The decline in agricultural operations since 1970 to date is what I looked at to find out. From 1 million operations, it's gone down to 260,000. That's a 74% decline. It went click. I introduced an abundant report where we talk about animal stock developing. It's a similar question, sort of. Vertebrae have gone down by 70%, and likewise have the farmsteads gone down by 70% in Germany. Maybe there's a context. 70% do not have successors. In Denmark, it was 80% of operations didn't have a successor, and the owners in part were in pension age, at pension age already. So there are good reasons to think about it. I'm absolutely grateful to Herr Müller for the good presentation. This is a sore spot that you've met. I do not think that the farm-to-fork strategy will be the response to biodiversity. I would subscribe to your analysis, your last chart, also that everything would be on red in all other questions. I would be careful. No, I would be cautious. You'd have to look at it again. It's not just biodiversity. In the end, it is important that we think about it, how we get the chemicals outside, how we get it down. You can talk about horizons and targets. We agreed on that. In the central issue, the chemicals thing was not so controversial. We did not precisely agree on the farm-to-fork values. We said it should be checked again, and the impact would need to be verified. We all found that fair. We found it right, but we also did not throw out farm-to-fork. We said it should carry on. I find it right. The grouses will have to live on it, that there's enough insects out there. They need that. The old animals need seeds. Seeds can come from grain, but often it'll have to come from herbs. What they don't need is a high pesticide load. We are bee harbors. I can have flourishing green strips if there is a poison. I don't have the effect if I want to carry down the chemicals load. Let's talk about how to do it reasonably. Briefly on how to do it. Herr Hosenkamp is right when he said objectives are easy to formulate. You would have to talk about measures. The goals for the political design are important. You have to roughly need to know what do you want to achieve, and you have to measure success in the end to say, have we been successful, have we not? For this, it needs figures and numbers, and I would not reproach the farm-to-fork strategy with that demanding for numbers. Now, the mix of tools that I would imagine, and this is what the ZKL report seems to show, sort of WWF specific, but other reports do not differ significantly. I see an important role of administrative law everywhere, where there are particularly grave questions to be sorted out in the field of chemicals deployment. An administrative regulation will be necessary if it's a chemical that has a harmful social function. It has to be banned or regulated. This is the classic administrative law point that is indicated this way and called for. Regarding administrative law, what it cannot do in the end is offering 50% reduction, supplying reduction. It takes many more measures. It takes farmers in the end that go along with it. In the end, you cannot measure it in grams, so designing policy has to be on board. And you can't do that with administrative law and with bans only. No, this law kills the mood. You have to be cautious about it. As his life experience tells me, I thought if I wanted, there'll be a law, I call for a law, and then it will work. Now experience shows it has hardly worked out. So if there's a 50% plant protection agent reduction or 20% fewer fertilizers, then the target is right. Certain agents should be banned and certain areas should be exempted, not nature conservation areas, but there may be nature conservation areas that have the function where you have to look more specifically. Categorically ruling it out, I would not, but we don't have to go that far to go to any nature conservation area. Then we would have 30% of the space. This cannot be meant. What's more important now, much more important, is why you have such an objective, biodiversity, that you design policy making. You wonder what contributes to the farmer truly working without losses in yields. You have to talk about promoting eco-landscape, having grain after grain. ZKL says something good. It's not to promote them financially if there's no demand. Now, demand has to grow. Otherwise, the efficient eco-farmers are harmed in their economics. All that has been received, has been heard, is seen by us, by the environmental organizations and the WWF, and the precise application technology. This is a pleasant development over recent years, although my colleagues warned this is robotics. There's too much hope that's harbored in it, but it's good to think about it. I can encourage you to carry on thinking. There's nothing bad I could find about it. What matters in the end is to positively design it. You've got to have the things that you want in society, that we as nature conservationists want. Well, you say it's reasonable. We do it in such a way that it's joyful, that we have incentives to work with. My wish and target would be that a concept like the one of Jörg Müller, the hamster and the lark, and other birds that have died out. How can we get to the farmer enjoying the lark to sing? How can we get biodiversity to be a pride of farmers and where it works? There's no exaggeration. Like in the picture book, that was the Dutch model. Real dairy farmers whom we visited, who took us to their shed, that's like a bird protection center, and who proudly showed us the population numbers of their various small birds. What did they do? They sat down. That's just one example from Holland that I saw. And they said, we want to get out of the misery, the plight. We'll take the agricultural funds which are available, and we consider how do we rightly use them so that is joyful to us and that we have more birds around. And the decisive motive was how do we get rid of bureaucratic, stringent rules. And the classic success has come of it. I've never seen anything better. Reasonably used, I heard it was one-dimensional. It was a terrific success to get the birds back. In nature conservation with gigantic birds, they chased them up. These are farmers who got the numbers up. They invited conservationists to put a strategy in mind. But it's all intrinsic, nothing prescribed. So this is something we've got to go for. And a similar example was when a few years ago, Heino von Bassewitz, who was around the biopark in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, he said, how do we get more biodiversity into it? And together with him and the Truman Institute, we developed the long-term concept, agriculture for biodiversity. The successes were not that terrific, but where they were applied, we got all these portfolios up. We had it monitored. We have wild bees increased by 100, a factor of 100. We have small other birds, Braunkehlchen. The Dutch hadn't had that at the time yet. It was just done. We backed on volunteering of farmers. Everybody else said, I don't need that corner. What can I do with that corner of the countryside of that land? And we optimized it, and we had an incentive via higher market prices. It's not only about state funds. It was about Edeka, the chain, the retail chain. It's not terrific. It's not very much. It does, but it works. You don't have to spend the big money. I found the computation super to say what Müller said. 1 billion would do for biodiversity spaces and for enrichment programs to organize it properly. This is a real key to the solution. And also go for volunteering, although it will not always work with volunteering, but there's a gigantic potential around, and it would move us forward all in all. It would get us out of this misery of that fight. Well, you keep thinking we want to dispel the farmers, and biodiversity would only cost and create starvation. No, we can go beyond that. We can overcome that thought and that philosophy and that discussion. Thank you. Stick around here. Just select a chair here. Stick around and look at the other. Jörg Begenter to join us with a wonderful applause. Get yourselves a chair and a good applause for Carina Konrad, Deputy Chair of the Free Democrats, of the Parliamentary Group and Chair of Sustainability and Innovation Working Party. She's a certificated agriculturalist, and on top of being an MP, also with her family has a farming operation in the Hunsrück. So great to have you here. And likewise, in the second panel, the Managing Director of the Agrar e.V. Industry Association's Managing Director of Pharma Germany, and has over 30 years' experience in this agricultural industry. Frank Gemmer, your applause. Herr Gemmer, we should have enough chairs. Right, ladies and gentlemen, before we begin talking, again, let me give you the hint. I'll be happy to receive your questions that you may ask, like in the initial panel. Here again, an audience question for you that you should answer. This is the QR code, which is shown here. At home, you have a link to it. You click it, and there is a question. If you played along before, it was simple. You just had to say A or B. Now it gets to be really complex. You can weight it 0 to 1 point. I don't care. And the question is, what for you as a consumer, people like you and me, when shopping food, what has gained in importance? Where we are in our times, since we've had the imminent recession, the energy crisis, the war in Ukraine. So you can answer A, prices for end consumer, B, availability and choice, C, sustainable production, or D, regional origin. As I said, you don't have to opt for one. You may give between 1 and 5 points. We give you more time between 1 and 5 points. Take the time and carry on. We'll begin over here simply. And before we direct the first question to Müller, I can see there are some in our chat. At this junction, let me address Frau Konrad. The farm to fork strategy on the national level, what's that assessed like in Germany? We heard internationally. There are questions and sorrows and queries and concerns. What about in federal Germany? We are hearing the proposals, and everyday life we're dealing with it because agriculture is a very emotional topic. As it was presented, farmers, I can understand it, I'm a farmer myself, feel attacked and put in the corner. This is because of historical experience. There's good reason for that. And on the other hand, there are more and more claims, more and more requirements. All in all, we're in an international environment of competition, which is not simple at all. And that's why it scares you where there are proposals, where you can see where you focus on productivity, and where productivity is also jeopardized without having solutions how to make it work in practice. And that's why we have to intensely deal with it, which we as the FDP parliamentary party do, and this is why our claim to come up with concrete proposals how to handle it. Can you reconcile sustainability and productivity? And in the current time, where indeed this is the introductory question we had, where indeed consumers are faced with entirely new financial requirements or challenges than the year before. It's all the more important that you answer that more swiftly than would have been the case when we began to talk about farm to fork. I had a great benefit and advantage here. I talk with experts. In your job, you don't have that advantage at all. I know that from digitalization. I have done that for years, and 16 years ago, I used to talk with many politicians who did not understand where the trip goes, where the journey goes. This has drastically changed. But with agriculture is such a complex topic. How often is it your feeling you have to begin from scratch for the colleague to actually understand what to talk about and what happens if a false decision is taken? So in farm to fork, it's also about not taking a wrong decision. Let me put it differently, the other way around. It's not bad for the general political discussion if people know, some people know what they're talking about, who know where the experience comes from. That may not be the case in Parliament. It's explained simply by the fact you check around the numbers we're given, how family farmers have we got left. Fewer than 1% of the people are still main income farmers. It gets to be fewer and fewer. We have a disconcerting average age, over 50. Many successors are not found yet. And this means, I know that from my own experience, actually a farmer has got enough to do and has no time to run for parliament or to do that, because actually you have to reconvert your own operation totally. It's their decisions are taken in the political space that aim at and have an impact on farming, on production, on the business operation and the environment, because the areas before and after agriculture is enormously productive, has always been innovative, a precursor worldwide, a role model in technology, for instance, pioneering. So in many cases, this has been a surprise for many colleagues when we talk about detail what happens in the stable or on the acreage. So spoiler alarm, yes, autonomous driving has been around in the farm for a longer time, and we have a wrong image of agriculture. They still have this rubber boot and milk bottle farmer's wife. No, we're one of the most innovative industries. It's mega fun to be part of it, to see what all works. I've been enthused about it. It's been fantastic. I can promote that all the time. It's a fantastic profession. So it's not everybody feeling badly about it. We have two questions to Herr Müller. He's not at the panel, but he's in the chat. Maybe he can answer the question. One, dear Müller, is it praise in your direction when you were in Brussels, and when will you affect and be available to the Brussels Commission with word and advice? Let's identify a solution. Thanks for the wonderful concrete example. The consumer. How can Germany ensure to labeling is included, and biodiversity is included, and sustainability is included? How does German agriculture fare in this connection? Does anybody have data or an idea how you could contribute? Concrete examples are great, of course. I'm not a specialist myself, but you might tell us. I'm happy to take this question and try. We're in Brussels indeed very often. We talk with the parliamentarians, some with the deputies. There are parties that listen, others that will not listen, or less. What is the purpose? The purpose, 50% reduction of input, or is it biodiversity to be promoted? And like I said, it's a discussion we're having with the MPs in Europe. And when it's about biodiversity, it gets a bit difficult. That takes us to the second question already, where you have to have indicators that you define. Small bound cage and keep it so the small birds, that would have to be defined. When you reach it, you can also include it in a sustainability strategy, but we haven't got that yet. The EU Commission is not so far. They say 50%, we've attained it all. Their own report says, although it's not true, we still have loads of talks with the colleagues from nature conservation in Brussels to be had so that sustainable targets are defined, which in the end can move something. A general ban is just a general ban, and they haven't achieved anything yet. So try together to specify. I have a feel you joined that. It was about similar things. Do you want to comment? I can only repeat. The example goes in the right direction, and certainly you need to say that in classic sustainability labeling, we had this reflex. We still have that reflex. Basowitz saw that. He saw the weakness. Eco-farming answers questions, gives consumers a good feel, but biological diversity, there only is half of an answer. We've known from studies that virtually unintentional diversity of insects, herbs has gone up in eco-farming, but it's not that. All the deficits that we have would be compensated automatically by organic farming. They are not. Nobody would deny that. The discussion goes further than that, which is good. But it takes these questions. We see that Brussels sees biodiversity as a great and big dimension. That's why we have the restoration law, Natura 2000. What is decisive is that the question is also taken into agriculture. We in Europe have no choice. That aside, it's also true of North America. I would recommend that as well. There's nothing good about it if the world is divided up into North and South America, production spaces and pure nature conservation spaces. Ecological consequences in the high production spaces in the US are disastrous. In South America, likewise, again. So agrobiodiversity, all in all, to look at it holistically and to say we also have to use the production spaces with life. There has to be life. I'm firmly convinced that most farmers will be happy about it. But remember, how do we make it a joy? How do we avoid make it a burden? It's affordable. It's got to be manageable. I talked with many farmers in various talks over recent years. I've don't seen any who said he didn't care how the environment fares on their soil. It's a super question for the labeling of sustainability. I don't have a really good answer. I fear that right now this is falling behind. It's a super target. I'll pick it up. There's another question geared to everybody. People say we have a problem if we have too much organic farming. This is less productive. In the end, we will not have enough food to feed everybody. Question is, how strong can technical innovation help to have more yield? For my layperson, it would be a combination of, let me quote Professor Nigel, there's an enormous research demand for efficiency and productivity in eco-farming. Every euro is spent well. I don't distinguish between conventional and eco, but what is the result? I have to look at the findings that are gained in research work. They have to be objectively also geared to conventional farmings. I see potential in plant breeding. This is a mental issue. The eco-farming associations will have to develop a stance. Right now, we are all alone. Of course, there's great potential. Everything around the soil fertility can be extended in the biologicals, the alternative operation means. Of course, the issue is robotics. How can mechanical weeds be combated? In the conventional lab in Weihenstephan, there's a robot that combats ampher. I had to use glyphosate, a gigantic. If you have enough on the meadow, then nothing else will grow. Ampher, gigantic plant. Right now, the methodology is mother-child, and the robotic machine does that via a regional a huge area automatically and overnight. Let's not talk about conventional and organic, but rather good practice. Ask the right questions. What ideological prevents us from reaping the potential? This really gets on my nerves. In the political space, in political Berlin, playing one against the other, conventional farming against organic farming, that's not making progress. I mean, there are farmers who do both. There are many farmers who do both. One of them is here. In agriculture, this is not a topic. In agriculture, the production form is decided on what is fitting with my operation. How does it work? And what's the financial result in the end? Does it make sense? Have I understood it? Do I have the people? Do I have the technological equipment to make it work? These are the questions that will come up practically. For us, the political question must be, how do we facilitate sustainable agriculture, reconciling society and agriculture, that no gigantic move of production is made abroad into regions of the world, wherever, where much is done to the detriment of the environment, then we would win by that move. This is a central issue you've got to ask, and then you easily get to the answers that Mr. Vigente gave, that you have to bank on technology, you have to bank on innovation, do away with all the obstacles towards plant breeding. Genetic scissors are an innovation which create for the land, for arable land. In medicine, it's quite normal. We are grateful that we have vaccines available through this genetic work that's bedeviled in an area, in the green area in agriculture. Although many don't understand the potential, it is 1,000 times higher to remedy these conflicts. It's not a cure-all, it's not a panacea, it's another revolution after digitalization, after the techniques in agriculture. And in the difficult times, we would be moved forward.
When we talk about sickness or death, red gene technology always works very good, but green gene technology doesn't work. But you say we have to provide offers, and that also have to be understood like offers. You wanted to add something? Yes. I wanted to talk about the food security problem in the world, and also about CRISPR, because I saw that this is a question from the audience. We see the screen and the questions from the audience. We don't think that we will have 100% organic farming, also not in the near future. So we are talking about conventional agriculture, and for us that's not a bad technology, not at all. I can see a de-stressing in this direction. We all agree that the great challenge, also with the organic farmland and also the conventional farmland, the goal is to think about good solutions, so we have good solutions in the end. But I want to protect the organic farming when it comes to productivity. Because of my job, I have journeyed a lot to Africa, and when you look at the farming there, it is from the old ages. All the technologies that the organic agriculture can teach the world. Also in Africa, the good treatment of the soil and also of the animals, and also to appreciate the animals and the soil. If we apply this also in Africa, that would be an enormous increase in productivity. We are not talking about decreases, but we would take steps forward for the poorest of the poor, and that would be so great for the African society and also the agriculture. Of course, we have these programs that help Africa, and with our measures that we have at the moment working with small farmers, because Africa already has a lot of flight into the urban areas, but the rural areas produces more and more people. That is not productive. They cannot supply their own food. So they cannot afford to set their sight on mineral fertilizers, but they have to work with what they have. And CRISPR and the WWF has been a difficult relationship to gene technology. We have all the views that you could have in our organization. Of course, religion plays a role, and also cultural views. But globally, we have found a decision that is the exact. We do not say no, but we also do not cheer. The measures that have been taken now are something we do not agree with. That is so far away from the promises that have been made. So we have to say, we do not want this. We do not want to buy this. Bring clean solutions to the table. They will be checked, and then it is all right. Herr Gemmer, you wanted to add something to this before looking at your answers to our questions. The question, organic farmland, for me, in the end, this will grow together. We will have to take the best things from both in order to increase productivity on the farmland that we have. Mr. Müller already showed us how this could work. And for me, from both economic ways, they will form one in the end. If the conventional operations can has more opportunities than the ecological farming, how can we secure biodiversity and productivity? Both have to work together. If we do not use plant protection agents, we have this dilemma. If I eat less animals, the nitrate in the soil will go. The nitrate in the soil will go back. In order to secure productivity, from my point of view, both of them have to grow together. And we have to build a sustainable system. This is why we, as an industrial association, work on this problem. So now we are talking about consumers. We have to bring the consumers into the boat, because policymakers take decisions for the consumers. So now we try to look at what the consumers say. Our question was, what is more important for you when buying foodstuff? There were 4 answers: prices, availability, sustainable production, and regional origin. The answer is simple. I will say 2 things. The x-axis from left to the right are the important points. 3.5 is the highest rate, which is the price for the consumers. That's what I said. If people are unwell, or if they have economical problems, they do not care about biodiversity, about sustainability, about organic products. Thank you so much for highlighting this. And on the second place, we have availability and diversity. We had an example, toilet paper, which is not really agricultural, but also oils. That was the second toilet paper in the pandemic, or in the beginning of the war against Ukraine. All of a sudden, the oil was gone from the supermarkets because consumers could not get oils. Not even in the organic supermarkets. It was very expensive, but it was there. But I had different experiences. There was no oil there. But that's an important topic. But Mr. Heinrich, you agree with that. That is very understandable, of course. But if this is the case, and that is an impression that I have gained as a consumer, to what extent can you understand this problem? Because this is the wrong direction, but it is the case. We have to see what the ramifications are here. If this is the real view of the people, this is very negative. In a recent discussion, somebody calmed me down. They said that the media is exaggerating and that the scene internally does not reflect this. But I just made a survey. 30% demand on organic resources. But in the scene, that is not the reality at the moment. If it would be our future, that would not be a positive development. I can't add anything on this. Mr. Migende, you wanted to add something? And then we have a question from the audience. It is important to look behind the numbers. The demand does not go back, but only in the high price segment. In the discounters, it stays and it also increases. That is the dilemma, that the organic landscape does only work with high prices, and that is the great problem. And we have to think about how to work it. And but Tina Anders also added something. She said that it was very weird. She lives in Lübeck and she works in an organic supermarket, and she says she has the least expensive milk at the moment. The milk in the organic supermarket knows that it is between €1.49 and €1.69. You can buy organic milk starting at €1.29. And I don't know about conventional milk because I don't buy it, but she says that she is the least expensive producer at the moment. But the organic demand in discounters is going up because everything is expensive anyway. So I will buy an organic product because it is expensive anyway. There was another question from the audience. The decrease in the direct marketing is very visible. Where we interact with customers, it is about 30% throughout the spectrum. There is a decrease and a tendency in more decreasing. That is very frustrating. And another position that you mentioned earlier, no, but I will say that later. Thank you so much. The question was very clear. In the second time, we want to get more concrete. We heard some cool stuff, but again, if we say that we wouldn't have farm to fork, or it wouldn't be so concrete, or without real measures, real regulations, what other examples are there that we can tell other peoples in the direction of biodiversity and also food security? What other examples are there out there? You say that is one of the most innovative sectors, but you know more. Should I start? Of course. High lever that we have is the agriculture policy. In the last 20-25 years, levers have been operated in a single direction, not looking at the whole picture. And that is maybe part of the explanation why we have these confrontations today. That could have been avoided if we would have gone in different directions. But this support is a huge lever, and we have already said this, and farmers and environmental protectors are not so different. I know a lot of projects where farmers consulted environmental protectionists. How can we move in the same direction on site locally? But there are the restrictions on the farmers that lead to things not working out. The best example for it is the screening of these areas in the fields where a lot of biologists have explained to me that this was the wrong measure, but from a regulatory point of view, they couldn't have done it differently. If you listen to these stakeholders and also make it possible on a political level and also work together better, there is a great potential, because nobody wants that their children do not hear about, they do not dare to tell at school that their parents are farmers. And that is a great problem, because children grow up like this and have negative experiences because of the job of their parents, and they will not take on the same work as their parents. And of course, the farmers try to act on this, but I think we also have to relax together. Those who work make mistakes. That has been like that forever, but you cannot make the same mistakes twice, and also 100 people should not make the same mistakes. We should try to learn from each other and also try to learn positive things from our mistakes. And that is a question of mentality for us all. How we work on mistakes that shouldn't happen, but they are normal. I think all of you have already made a mistake. And in current times, their mistakes are scrutinized, the mistakes farmers make. And of course, it's in the media, and everybody points their fingers at them. So they do not have the incentive to work, to learn from their mistakes, and to face the debate. And a farmer is not a born communicator, oftentimes. Mrs. Conrad, the farmer, has also lost contact to the consumer, and that's a big problem. Of course, the operations had to grow in the structural change, and so you have a lot of work, and the day only has 24 hours, and the consumer doesn't understand this. And this also leads to conflicts that could have been avoided. And maybe if people had thought about their words, they would have said different things. I am relaxed because I have the view into both worlds, but that leads to the building up of conflicts. So how the public perceives farmers is one of the main points, and I can say that the policy does not take on their part in solving this problem. So respect and communication are very important. There is another question from the audience, but you wanted to say something on this? No, but let's just get to the question from the audience. Michael Reiniger, Deutscher Raiffeisenverband. I think we agree that most farmers would like to do more for biodiversity, but still we only have a few projects, but that was it. So the Industrial Association found out that a copper injection would be very effective for farmers. But how could we change this? What could we say to the farmers? What would bring a huge amount of farmers to say, okay, I will do it differently, or I will invest in this and that? I have a lot of ideas. I just chose one. You can apply this to all different topics, but because I went into detail, I will have to go into 10,000 meters of height. if we talk about site-specific fertilization with farmers, they say, "Dear Baiva, thank you, but I have different sorrows. I have to think about if farming makes sense for me in general. And then if I hear that the government is talking about taxonomy on farming, and the oil is the most important thing for the government. I'm sorry, you're... And that has to stop. If we do not have motivated farmers, we can forget innovation. And I can say the same thing for agricultural trade. We have to talk about these topics. But for me, it is decisive that the farmers want, the organic farmers want, and the conventional farmers will want. For me, it was a very positive experience over the last years that I can feel that among a lot of farmers, there is the readiness to change something. For example, to work for biodiversity. Of course, some of them, they don't really know what they have to do. There will be a lot of good ideas in the next time, but also consulting farmers will be very good for everybody. But let me talk about the representatives of agricultural associations. Please let us talk about things openly. There is a huge potential here for a new societal alliance, because in the small villages, they have a very strong connection to their farming, because people meet each other. And when there are more signals from above to enter into dialogue, we don't have to fight all the time, but look for solutions that lead to the joy of a farmer in the end. When we talk about biodiversity, it is a positive target because it has a positive outcome. Maybe almost everybody wants to do something good. At one point, I understood that maybe 100% should not be the goal, because 100% is never what we reach. I think our country would look differently if we would set our goal to 30%. If we would reach 30% of our goals, we start with 10%, and that's a huge number of people. But there's a question, how can we lead the way from these big projects out? And that is a question to the policymakers. They are not working on these cooperation projects, but they are aware of it. I tried to get a rendezvous with Mr. Özdemir. I think he will meet me, and he is also interested, but we have to advertise for these measures. This is not about forcing somebody to do something, but it is about joy. And we have to make soil good in the villages. I would like to lighten up our conversation. Of course, what you said is right. You said that the ministries have to take on these problems, and that is a problem for me. In Germany, we say that the government should solve these problems, but we have structures in the agricultural trade where consultation is part of the DNA. The innovations are do not come from the states, but from the operations, from the agricultural trade, and that should be the program. And we should get to the table together, and everybody should take on their own role. But the state does not propose a online access law, but all the Länder build some algorithm applications, and the business does not want to invest if everything is free of charge. I agree. We do not need more innovation. We need more innovation in order to be successful. That is my experience. I agree, but I made the experiences while talking to the government agencies. If we want to talk to them, they say that we tried free measures for 30 years now. This does not work. We have to set prohibitions. There is the lack of want to discuss. We showed the biodiversity concept, which is great, which also uses the current systems that we already have. But we have not talked about the topic of the reduction of emissions. At the moment, we are working online with smart sprayers, for example, that has cameras that detect where the fertilizer has to be sprayed. We can also use offline approaches. We have drones who can see where are weeds in the fields, and they can use pesticides to get rid of them. But these systems are very complex, and so we need to consult the farmers so they can actually use these approaches. So we need incentives for the funding and also the consultation. That is the point where we could bring these technologies to the forefront, not only because it is very difficult to have these complex systems and to use them without training and without consultation. These site-specific applications are used in 56% of German farmland, if you ask the farmers, but only on 25% it is really used. And if you ask what the hinderings are, is costs and maybe also the red band if you have to document everything. So we have to decrease the red band here in Germany, red tape. I am liberal. Of course, everybody should take on their role in the system. The private sector has their work, the farmers have their work, the national protectioners have their own role, and of course the state should also take on their role. The work of the state should be to make things easier in order to be able to cooperate better. That is what I try to increase. How about your forefront? You are walking against walls the whole day because the topic of digitalization, which is the basis, and that is already a problem. But we try to accelerate on this topic. When it comes to digitalization, we have a strategy that has real goals. It is a very broad topic, and a lot of ministries with different ambitions are involved. And as we have set these goals, and the German government has set these goals for us as members of the parliament, it is a great joy to also reach these goals. Of course, that is great. I want to mention two other aspects that are not very easy. I want to go back of weeds and precision technology. If it's so efficient that with minimal work they see every little weed, decreasing, of course, the use of chemicals. I agree with that. But we also have to agree on letting a few weeds stay. But that is decisive. If we use technologies that are so efficient, We cannot organize the next excess. We have to say that these robots can be programmed. Let's program in a smart way. Weeds are also very useful when the birds eat the seeds, for example. It is not a little. Some weeds are not harmful. Now, I'm an expert in digitalization. If the software or the AI knows in how many weeds to have in order for it to be optimal for everybody, that is possible. And I think that these systems have to be programmed in that way. Other way, we have made another mistake because this technology will be discredited. While talking to the German Farmer Association, we talked about the nature restoration law. And the people are very worried about this. That makes me think, because honestly, I read these texts differently than you. I understand why a farmer or a farming representative reads this differently. Of course, they will measure us by these numbers. And another person says, we will never reach these percentages. They are not binding and they're soft. That's the way I read these texts. Of course, I read these texts and I admit that I don't think they are a real solution. I didn't rejoice when I read these. If these, if they would really be put into reality, they would be great, but I don't believe in it. I see that the discourse is affected negatively by this. We have to have this discussion. We will talk about this in the future. I am far from bad-mouthing this nature restoration law. It's a great approach, but we have to talk about it. And there is one devil, as so to say, in the system. There is one law that cannot be used with incentives. And this problem has to be overcome, especially when talking about nature protection, that there has to be incentives. There have to be, otherwise it will never be successful. And it is not as successful as it should be. Mr. Konrad, Mr. Gemmer, you wanted to add something? I can support this. These concepts on a free basis, building cooperations with the farmers, they know where the areas are. How can I support this biodiversity? That is the right approach. If I have these cameras, I can use them. Of course, they have to be defined. If you have too many weeds, you cannot use your yield. You have to see how much biodiversity can I leave in my farmland. And the topic is a topic of networking. It's a topic of habitats, of recovering habitats, and not having 3 herbs in your farmland. But the most important thing is, in this summer we have seen it, that there were no herbs at all. We have to look at the structures as a whole. And we have to work on these structures, and the rest has to follow. We have to work selectively. I think we are not, what is not made aware that the different types of reading these texts, the basis are the farming operations. They have been worked on for generations, and every generation does their thing. And now we have a lack of confidence. There is no confidence of the farmers into the policymakers, and there is no trust into the nature associations. Because we have these proposals like SUR who say there are huge areas where there are changes in property at the cost of substance, and the substance hasn't been huge to begin with. There is a site from the government where you can look at the income of these operations. In Berlin, in the middle of Berlin, you could not pay an apartment from the income of a normal farmer. And half of the operations are supported, and they are dependent on public financial aids. And they are scared because they work so much and they get so little from it. And the substance of their operations, they have to find a way to give it to the next generations, to give the operations to the next generations. Some of the farmers tried to want to increase their productivity because they look at the problem of hunger. They want to try new things, but in the end, it has to be positive for them. To take away the fear of the farmers. And that does not work by debates.
That was an additional question. A direct question. The main problem is that very many associations are announcing the system change for all of agriculture. That's linked with it. And strangely enough, it's over 30%. All the water protection categories feed into it. We assume much larger spaces conflict. If you take conservation out, nature conservation out, it's still 30%. Those inside that, they don't care if it's 10 or 30%. They're 100% affected, those located there. That isn't a question of their existence. Those are those operations that previously worked for agriculture conservation. That's why they're worthy of conserving. They are punished and penalized. And this is what harms us most in nature conservation. The opposite model is the Dutch model. And there's a snag, was to appeal to policymakers. Administration tried in Lower Saxony. Policies were in favor, agricultural associations were in favor, environment, and then the lower ministerial echelon say they don't want. You can guess who made his way. What a shame. You wanted concrete responses. That's what motivates me to work for digital solutions, to make it work, like you said, with watering. We have an algorithm that spots the low yield zones out in the space that recommends flourishing plants there, autochthonous varieties, so not to have anything there. Technically kind of difficult. The farmer doesn't like to reconvert the drilling machine, but that's the issue where you have the sharing of machines. There are concrete solutions. That's the way it has to go. It is possible. A level playing field. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to stop out there. Thank you, Karina Konrad, Christian Hardy, Frank Kemmer, Christian Jende. They will have another applause from you. And do take your seats again. We'll have a brief summary at the end of this. I will ask the first Vice President of the German Farmers Association and Chair of the Union to Promote Oil and Protein Plants, Detlef Kurek. He's a certificated agricultural engineer, and he runs the Committee for Plants and Seeds. Great to have you. You listened all the time, and you've written down a lot. Hello. Sorry, no microphone. I'm so happy. Well, it works this way. I must say, whether we talk about agriculture, the association work, I mean, it's not bad if work is fun. It has fun to listen. great big thank you to all the speakers for their findings and their presentations. And it was a wonderful job. Thank you. And you've done your job in a most excellent manner. I also liked it a lot. I enjoy when you know more after the moderation than before, which definitely is the case. Let us try and summarize. We've heard a lot. Yourselves, you're a farmer yourselves, and you have contact with many colleagues, and you're the ones that suffer from what the EU Commission will decide upon, which goes through the management levels and the administrative levels. With what we've heard, how much bellyaches have you got? Or with what optimism do you carry on? The precondition for being a farmer, on top of good training, is that you're optimistic on principle. Otherwise, you let go of it early on. I'm not a farmer on the side. No, from deep down of my heart, I am a farmer. I'm too little in the operation, but when I am there, I enjoy the days. I hardly interfere with the works processes. They don't let me. I do the work where I'm not disturbing so much. So I'll give a spade and go along the ditches. I'll have a tractor on the field slowly. But then I am the one that goes through the countryside with open eyes. I see at times, when we talk about what we talk about today, this was satisfactory that in recent 30 years, I haven't done so much wrong. I'm firmly convinced, and this was processed here today, we'd have to have both in economics and more ecology in conventional agriculture. So, for our survival, we must go towards one another and take the best, as you said. This is the right approach to take. For instance, in my own operation, I had green places for beehive operators. I didn't get any funding for it. I mean, the word bee was around. What do you do? Nothing was growing there. People said, others said, they didn't understand what I was doing. It cost just money. I said, well, I thought about that twice, and it occurred to me it has an added value. The EU didn't have to explain that to me. Both the bee owner and I shared the same idea, and this became plain to me. If we manage to get these incentives rolled out into the public, lighthouses are good, but they alone is not what we need. We had a broad application. I've heard lots of suggestions, considerations. So bellyache, well, I had none when I came in. I mean, I've known the gang that we're working with here, but otherwise they have become less. Any open questions from your point of view? What we could not sort out finally, of course, is the concrete matters, how to make it work. I understand the European Union, when they do a plan, they cannot have those that know about nothing, is what we follow by the accountability is what they say. We have to have 3 criteria. They must be easy to realize for the farmer. They must be acceptable to the citizen who goes for a walk. There must be an added value that he sees and must be billable and accountable. I accept you must do accounts. But these are the 3 elements that have to balance in sustainability. And we still owe the workings. We can't do it on our own. That would just be a playground. No, but we have described the way how to get there, listening to one another. And the second stage is understanding one another. This has become plain today. We're at the end of the event, of this event. Out there, we'll carry on. I've read, and this is totally new to me, rape pressing. I tried to say what this means. The repressing is where oil should come out, something to touch, that is oil. We've chosen this format years ago. We had implemented. We want to make it as an opportunity with you, the lobbyists, to talk with you and the association representative. We have visitors coming in. Lots of people will join us. We will have it full house. We will have, as a symbol, take the rape from the new harvest, from a new 2022 crop, Briefly, it was sketched what the result is. I took the liberty to mention a few words afterwards. I'm happy to see you all back there.